like the when people like really quickly when people like say or like
Mhm.
racists try to argue that black people are inferior, that you know like the 1350 meme, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that statistic is true, although there are a lot of racists who take that and make bad conclusions from it.
Yeah, so like to say, well, I mean, obviously this is stemming from a class-based issue initially, right? But then like the entailments of that people like racists pick up, well, those are
Mhm.
strictly race-based. That they like these statistics, which we already know, black people are more likely to get incarcerated, which are what these statistics are based upon because they don't have the money to defend themselves. Well, that just kind of continues this racial bias.
Yeah, but I don't think that we created that. I don't think that government action is the primary cause for these cycles to be existing. Like, I don't think that we put them in a situation where they didn't have economic standing, or like they had all these plights of like single parenthood in gangs.
Well,
So like,
certainly the war
I
on
think,
drugs, right? Like redlining war on drugs, Jim
yeah, I mean,
Crow
yeah,
I'm not
right?
denying. I'm not denying that there's been certain practices that disproportionately affected black people, but the stats that I've read and the studies I've read argue that the black community was doing better, after I think it's called the Reformation period. Like when they were integrating back into society, they had really low single parenthood. There was really high unemployment. It was even like higher than white people, I think. And what happened was around the same time that welfare and minimum wage laws were implemented, it just basically tanked their it tanked them economically. And then like we saw single parenthood like skyrocket because there's incentivizations to be a single mother if you can get welfare. Also incentives to not work because if you can just get welfare. And so like it seems like it's not like I don't think systemic racism is what caused these cycles, or at least isn't the primary cause for these cycles existing.
Well, I mean, systemic racism seems to be kind of a huge factor, right? So, like, when you have the inability to collect a loan, or when you have the inability to vote because some random state line was drawn, or you have to pass a reading test to actually, vote, like, these types of things can have huge impacts on your life.
Oh, you should definitely have to pass a reading. Okay, so this is a principle that I think will answer a lot of our disagreements, which is that something correlating with race, there being a racial disparity, does not mean there's racism.
Well, I
So
mean, go
yeah,
ahead, I'm sorry. Go
I was
ahead,
going to
sorry.
say the NBA employs more black people, but that's just coincidental. I would presume the reason why they do that is because they want the top performing athletes. And coincidentally, there happens to be more top performing black athletes than white athletes. And there are more men in there are more men in prison. Is that because
Yeah.
our criminal justice system is discriminating against men? No, because there's other factors that correlate with being a man, like being more violent.
Yeah,
So
so I
just
would
because
disagree with you here. You said a few things I disagree with. So for one, there's a lot of evidence that black people vote disproportionately Democratic, right? And black people were also the ones that, because of like the unfair schooling system at the time, had a like much harder time at reading, right? So when you just
Mhm.
arbitrarily impose these like reading tests or like these intelligence tests before you can vote, when you have a motivation to do so because black people will vote democratically, then yeah, there's a lot of evidence that there was some racial bias behind it. It was really weird.
Well, no, okay,
Yeah,
so if black
I,
people
I
can't
just wanted to
read,
say something real quick. Folks, if you don't mind, can you hand this over to Abraham? Because I feel like you guys are going a little more broadly off of the point that Abraham was discussing.
Yeah,
So
sure. I can hand it off to Abraham. Thanks for the talk, dude.
yeah, thanks, Rio. I mean, we can continue it some other time. I know you wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, sure.
all right.
Abraham, what were you going to discuss?
Yeah, so basically, Michael, I feel as though you're misconstruing my point and you're taking it to mean something that it doesn't actually mean. Now, judging by your statements, such as when you stated that, you stated that it would not be required for you to make moral arguments regarding the situation, the fact that you're privileged, right? You're saying that it is not, your privilege, or rather, your lacking privileges does not necessitate your ability to speak on this topic, nor does it define it entirely. And I agree there. I don't think we see it. I don't think we disagree on that point.
Okay.
I'm not saying that the fact that you're privileged, more privileged than I am, means that you cannot speak on this topic. Nor am I saying that you are, bound to not speak on this topic. All I am insinuating, rather, is that your privilege may give you, a decreased ability to empathize with protesters. That's all I was saying. I'm not saying it determines anything for 100% certainty. You can still very much have your opinions on the riots, and I'm not going to take that away from you. But I am saying that your lack of experience could make it difficult to empathize with protesters, right? And empathize with their plight. As someone who is a black man who does fear the police because they,
Sure.
they disproportionately target my group of people, I feel as though that I am more informed to make an to empathize with the protesters, not necessarily to make an objective moral statement, or let me not say objective, but just to make a moral statement, just to say that I can kind of empathize with them more. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
If you haven't personally experienced these police brutality that they're experiencing, I know that your group has, right? Black people have, but if you specifically haven't, how do you get to have any more claim to empathize with them than I?
Yeah, great question. Now, let's say hypothetically, I didn't actually experience any sort of racially charged experiences, but despite being black, well, regardless, even if not verbalized, the systematic oppression exists on a level that is both societal and on the government level, right? So no matter what I may have personally experienced in regards to police brutality, I have experienced injustice as a result of systematic racism and systematic oppression, regardless of whether I consciously acknowledge that fact or not.
Like what?
Such as the disproportionately, how businesses, for example, businesses are less likely to hire you if you have an ethnic sounding name or feature certain ethnic traits.
Have you personally experienced that?
But statistically speaking,
sure.
But the problem is that statistically speaking, I do experience it, whether I acknowledge that thing personally or not.
That's not true. So
that is objectively true. I can provide several cited scholarly papers that would support my statement. That is objectively true.
Can I take this call real quick? 1 second. It'll be like 10 seconds. Somebody's calling. My mom's calling.
I'm just gonna post everything.
Tell her I said hi.
Good Lord. Yeah. While he's doing that, I'm just gonna post everything that I have in links and citations before I even have to get into that.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So I don't doubt that there's a statistical increased likelihood, but I'm saying that that's a misunderstanding of how statistics work. So let me give you an example. The statistical likelihood of someone to be successful on YouTube is very small, right? But that doesn't mean that every single person who tries to go on YouTube is going to have that. So yeah, or here's another example. You have a 1 in 77 chance to die from a vehicle accident. But if you go and drive crazily on the highway and you're drunk, that goes up a lot. And so just appealing to some statistic that's an average and then saying, well, that means I also have that probability.
Well, the statistic isn't about likelihood, though. It's about the percentage at which it is about, objectively speaking, businesses do discriminate. It's not like the statistic does not imply probability. It implies rather that it's less a statistic on probability and more so an establishment of what is the truth of our societal situation, being that blacks are disproportionately oppressed, even on a societal level. Now, that doesn't mean in every single instance that it will occur, but it means that statistically speaking, right, these businesses, as a result of that systematic oppression, have continued to be enveloped in this sort of. So basically, so as an example, Spreen 2013 Table 7 reports unemployment rates for recent college graduates differ substantially between whites and blacks. 10.6% for whites, 20.2% for blacks. Research on the impact of the recession on demographic groups indicates that blacks are disproportionately affected. In addition to anecdotal evidence suggests a higher degree of selectivity on the part of employers during the following Great Recession. And this sort of research is perpetuated later by a Canadian study, which specifically goes over Asian names, but we're talking about minorities as a whole here, not necessarily just African Americans, though they are the most marginalized group. And in this instance, a person who has an ethnic sounding name from India, Pakistan, or China were 28% less likely to score at Canadian companies than applicants with Anglo names, even when all of the job candidates had been educated and employed in Canada.
Sure. Yeah, well, so the first claim you made about how college graduates have disparities between employment rates, there are plenty of factors that could explain that beyond racism. Simple differences between races and like disparities doesn't equate racism. I already said this. Like there are a white person has a lower chance, statistically speaking, to make it into the NBA. That doesn't mean that the NBA is discriminating against white people. Now, the part about like name discrimination, I'm not.
That's
Okay,
not.
two
No,
things.
that's a. Okay, I'll let you go.
Sorry, yeah. How do you want to do this? Do you want to do it like direct one-on-one, like you can just stop me if you like disagree with something, because we can do that. I just know people have different preferences on how they do it.
I'll just
You can go ahead and just
it's only 2 points.
To what you wanted to say. It's fine.
Okay, so I have a major problem with what you just said. You just
Okay.
mentioned statistics in regards to the NBA. White players are statistically less likely to be hired into the NBA, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. The problem with that statement is that the reason why African Americans are disproportionately hired in the NBA is because on average African Americans exhibit objectively true physical characteristics that benefit. However, but let me continue. The problem is that you cannot compare that to hiring in other aspects of the workplace, because these are things that require some level of experience or intelligence, something that there's inherently no biological difference in between races. There might be a societal difference between ethnicities in terms of intelligence. However, biologically speaking, that is not the case, right?
Well, that's not true.
It's like, for example, it's completely fine to not want a woman to compete against men in a sports competition because men are physically inferior to, or rather women are physically inferior to men, right? But it is not fair to disproportionately not hire women in an instance in which a occupation requires intelligence, because there is no notable difference between the biological and physiological intelligence between a man and a woman.
Yeah, that's
so those are that is okay.
You can look up not biological. It's actually, what is it? I'll find it real quick. It's Big Five personality differences. It's from the NCBIL. I think, I don't know what the acronym is, but like it's very well known that there are personality differences that correlate with men and women. Women are more agreeable, which means they're less likely to compete. They are more like person driven than they are object driven. So they're more interested in being like a psychologist than they are a scientist. And so those explain why there's less women in engineering and like science, and way more women in psychology. Like psychology has a disproportionate amount of women. There's more women than men, and that's because women. So with black people, there's also like correlations. I'm not saying they're causal. I think the bell curve like documents that there's an IQ correlation, but I don't know if that's genetic or not. That could just be education. I'm not saying that black people are inherently low IQ, but there is it's like Jews have higher IQ. Why is that? Maybe they have better education. Who knows?
Yeah, but the reason why I don't think these two examples correlate is, again, because differences in physical stature are genetic, whereas differences in intelligence thus far have not been quantified to be genetic by any notable scientific study, unless it's scientific studies that were, done by, say, Nazi Germany, right? Like
it doesn't need to be genetic for it to be different. If you grow up in a different culture, which gives you a lower IQ, you're not going to get a job that requires high IQ. That's not racist.
Of course, but we're not talking about whether the job requires high IQ or not. We're talking about whether, the statistics don't imply the motivation behind, or rather they're more so focused on the fact that specifically marginalized groups and minority groups are disproportionately discriminated against, not the fact that these businesses are looking at blacks and saying, oh, blacks are statistically less intelligent. Just say that's, for example. I'm not going to hire this black person as a result of that. You could use that same line of thinking to justify several things, such as like, racial profiling. Unless are you going to argue for racial profiling?
No, and I'm not suggesting that businesses are saying black people often have lower IQs, so I'm not going to hire them. Rather, maybe what's happening is a business makes someone take an IQ test, and it just happens that the white person scores higher. And I don't think businesses do IQ tests, but that's the idea.
I think you're just kind of running with the numbers and kind of assuming what the intentions behind the actions were. I'm just going to look at the numbers as to what they suggest as on themselves.
The numbers don't suggest racism.
The numbers do suggest disproportionate.
True, they do. There could be plenty of factors.
Okay, what are we saying? What are you defining racism as? Like, I want to
racism is discrimination based on skin color.
Okay, then we can agree on that definition. I think that these statistics more so imply the subconscious sort of hammering in of systematic racism onto our Western society, but I don't think they necessarily imply that the individual business must always be racist. I just think it is indicative of our current societal standing with how we view races and how we view ethnicities. So I think you're not like, that's not what I'm trying to argue based on the statistics. I'm just arguing that there is a correlation between these statistics and between a Western society in which racial prejudice is still a very large issue. Right?
Well,
Systematic.
you use the statistic of there being a disparity between employment rates after graduation and connected that to the argument that businesses are discriminating against black people. What I'm saying is that there could be a variety of factors that explain that besides racism. Just like the wage gap between men and women is explained almost entirely by other factors, like women choosing to work less hours.
Well, I'm not going to get into that because, well, for one, there's what I've learned is like what you just said, almost entirely. Even if you take into consideration those factors, there still is a wage gap, which is a problem. But
Well,
that's
there's like
I'm not
a 7% wage gap, and that could be due to factors which are difficult to measure, like negotiation. Like, how do we measure how well someone's negotiating? Are we recording it? Like, that could explain the 7%.
Yeah, but the negotiation point was an element of the statistic, though, because that goes into the whole idea that women are less confident there, and therefore, not as likely to make negotiations about getting higher positions. But I don't want to like get into
Sure,
that.
we don't need to get into a tangent on that.
Yeah. So I think that you kind of misunderstood the statistic I provided. It is about the unemployment rates in regards to college students, but then it goes on to say that demographic groups, between demographic groups, blacks are disproportionately affected, and that there's a higher degree of selectivity in hiring on the part of employers following the Great Recession, right? And then I use that point to then it is supplemented by further statistics which also correlate as well in other countries and other Western countries. Like I'm not saying that these things are correlative. It's just a part of the statistic that I provided. There's two separate points, right? I just wanted to provide the whole core.
I'm sure some black people are discriminated against from businesses. I'm sure, but I don't think that pointing to that then gives every black person access to claim oppression. How do you? I don't know your experiences, but it's totally possible that you've never experienced that. And just because you're a member of a group that has a higher likelihood doesn't mean you get to claim that.
But the thing is that black oppression is inherent whether you experience it or not. I think that's where we're kind of drawing a blank here. Is that
why is that?
Well, because oppression is inherent in this example because black people are inherently on a societal ladder are inherently inferior to more privileged groups. Now that doesn't mean I'm not then using that to argue that every single Caucasian person who speaks to it, who may, I'm not going to say that every single person is indicative of that truth, but I am going to say that on a societal standard, on a societal level, and on a government level, that this is the case.
So you're pointing to the fact that there is a statistical likelihood for black people to experience these disadvantages, and then concluding from that, this type of conception of all black people having disadvantages.
Well, if the statistics specifically relate to ethnicity and only use that as the factor for discrimination, then obviously the only factor is then that they are until otherwise noted or until otherwise proven. The factor that we can attribute this to is their ethnicity. What is one thing that all black people share? The fact that they're black. Therefore, they are all black.
All statistics do is they take into account every single situation and they find an average. There are plenty of situations though where black people don't experience what other black people experience, and they're not actually just like even though the statistic that people have a low chance to make it successful on YouTube, that didn't mean that I had a fucking 0.11111 chance to be on YouTube. Mine was relatively high based on other factors.
Yeah,
a black person who is in a good neighborhood with people who are not racist doesn't have the same disadvantages.
Yeah, but the problem that I have with the YouTube example though is the reason. I'm not saying that there aren't disproportionately marginalized groups based on other factors such as essentially YouTube is a free market in the sense that it is dominated by the large channels, and smaller channels are unlikely to find fruition as a result of that. It's not necessarily dominated for any racial or sexual or religious reasons. Sorry, what?
Why does that matter?
I'm saying, well, we're talking about in the context of racial.
Okay, so fine. Yeah, statistically speaking, statistically speaking, black people might be more likely to experience racism. How do you go from that to then say all black people experience racism?
Yeah,
systemic.
if the statistics are inherently, by their nature, disproportionately going to affect African Americans,
I
right?
don't think that's
Yeah, which is what the statistics imply. Again, I
the
think you're just kind of
statistics only
I think you're extrapolating more information out of the statistics than which
the statistics only imply that if we take an entire data set of black people, a lot
that
of them will experience racism. That does not
yes.
conclude every black person in the data set experiences racism.
I never stated. Yeah, I never stated that every
That's
black
your
person.
reasoning.
I never stated that every single African American has personally experienced racism. What I am
Mhm.
arguing that rather is that regardless of whether they may personally experience racism or not, does not indicate a difference in a societal level whether that racism still takes place. Right. Regardless, for example, regardless of whether I personally experience racism or not, there is still probably a senator or congressman who views all of my people, including me, as inferior. Now that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean he has personally said that to me, nor have I personally taken offense or experienced his statement firsthand.
There are
However,
Congress
that
people
yeah,
who are anti-white. Does that
yeah,
mean that I'm systemically disadvantaged?
yeah. The problem is that within the government, there are
Yeah.
disproportionately more senators who are anti-black than there are anti-white.
But if that doesn't affect me at all, how can I claim that I'm being oppressed?
You can't claim that you're being oppressed in this systematically in this example because just statistically speaking, the government supports you because you're privileged more than it
I
supports
don't
me.
even think that's true. I think the
Or,
majority of
or
people who are in government right now, are probably more like
uh,
anti-black racism than
okay,
pro.
okay, that's well. Okay, that's gonna get into that's an entirely okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, the
I
entire
would rather
Democratic
listen.
Party.
I would rather get back to what this discussion actually pertains to, which is the whole idea of the riots, right? Like whether they're justified. Like I'm not trying to shift goalposts here, but that's like kind of the original topic, and I'd rather
Yeah,
settle that because there's some important things to note there,
sure.
right? So
And well, I mean,
can you outline your perspective on that so I can get an idea of what I'm responding to?
yeah, couple arguments. First is I think obviously it's outrageous what happened to George Floyd,
Mm-hmm.
and there should be justice for that. Two things though. You don't solve that by hurting innocent people, the businesses who have done nothing wrong, whether
Mm-hmm.
they're multi-billion dollar businesses or local businesses. It's still theft. It's still hurting people who did nothing to George Floyd. The second point that I'll say is that I think the media exaggerates to what degree these types of incidents happen and as to whether or not they're racially motivated. So earlier in chat, I posted statistics about how if you're a black person, it's actually pretty unlikely for you to experience like police brutality, just statistically speaking. Obviously, if you live in a different neighborhood and there's a lot of police and
Well,
you're
no,
like, yeah, but just on average, black unarmed Americans are more likely to be struck by lightning than they are to be shot like unarmed,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
and I'm
but the media paints this narrative that like just being black walking out on the street it's dangerous. It's like no, it's not.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
No, well, the problem. No, well, I mean, the problem is that that's kind of misusing the statistics, right? I think that you're. Well, let me go back a second before I even get to that to address your
Mhm.
first point.
Mhm.
No one here is justifying the riots. At least I'm not. Which is this
Okay.
argument pertains to me. I'm not justifying the riots. I think you're falsely equating a sort of empathy towards the protesters to a proclamation of their justification or that they are justified.
I
It's
have
kind of
no
what I said.
empathy towards riots.
Yeah. Well, and that's fine if you don't, but I'm saying that
I don't think anyone
yeah,
should.
and that's okay if you don't. But what I'm saying is that the reason why I empathize with the rioters and despite their
Yeah.
what they have done is because it is representative of a larger issue in which African Americans' voices remain unheard no matter how much we protest. Now, but I agree with you in the sense that I think peaceful protests historically are more effective in this instance because the people aren't calling for a government coup or anything, which is where I think violence would be necessary. They're calling for reform. And I think just historically speaking in the United States specifically, the former has been more effective. So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but what I'm saying is that in this instance, right? Even
Mhm.
though I don't justify it, I
Yeah.
understand it in the same way that I can understand why a child may punch their mother in response to their mother proclaiming that you are not my son,
Yeah.
right? Even if that is not justified in doing that because you've escalated a statement into physical violence, I can understand and empathize with the child because they are in an emotionally unstable state. Now, I would like to address what you said about the businesses. While it is true a lot of businesses have been falsely and unjustly targeted by the rioters because they're just causing mass destruction. They don't really
Yeah.
discriminate except in the instance in which the first fire broke out, which is at the Target. I'm sure you know the
Uh-huh.
reason why they specifically targeted target is because it's for the reason that that target refused to sell the rioters supplies, even when they, came to do so and came to purchase these supplies in a peaceful manner. So this angered the rioters, and they decided to do what they did. There's also currently evidence suggesting that the violence was actually instigated by a planted police officer, though that is not something I'm going to argue here unequivocally. That's
I
just
haven't seen
something that
evidence.
you haven't, sorry, or you have.
I haven't seen evidence for the. Did you? Or
There,
are you
there is
talking
some
about-
there is some additional like I'm not going to just use the idea that he looks shady as the evidence or whatever. There is additional information that has come out that suggests that this person was actually an officer. But I'm not going to use that as a primary argument or anything. I just thought it was of note.
Sure.
So, in this example of Target, the reason why it was burned down is because they specifically did not supply the rioters with any materials. Now, again, I'm not saying that any of this justifies anything, in the same way that MLK did not state that rioters were justified, but merely that they are the voices of the unheard, right? They are the result of government neglect. Even though they are not justified, they are an inevitability of a government which does not listen to its people. And that is why I empathize with it, even if I do not justify it. Now, you may disagree, and if you want to outline why, you can.
Okay, so let's start with empathy. I can empathize with them just as much as you can. Like, I can put myself in the perspective of George Floyd. Watching the video, I was outraged as well. I don't need to be black to understand how terrible it is that, black people sometimes are oppressed. Absolutely, it's terrible. I don't need to be black for that. And I'd say the majority of black people who are outraged right now have never experienced that, right? But yet they're still able to be outraged because you don't need to experience poverty to relate to someone being poor in the circumstances. You don't need to have cancer to relate to someone having cancer. Yeah, it might be different, but like, you can still empathize with them. Second, I'll say you should empathize with the feelings they have from the harm they received, not with their reaction. So if a guy walks in and he sees his wife cheating on him with a dude, I'm going to empathize with what he's feeling. I'm not going to empathize with him shooting his wife and his, her mister at all. So, okay, you can empathize with the people's feelings and their outrage, but there's absolutely no reason to empathize with rioting. That's wrong. They shouldn't be doing it. There's no excuse. Now, you talk about Target, and how they wouldn't sell their supplies. If that's true, two things. One, private businesses are not obligated to sell anything to anyone. Okay, me choosing not to give you something is not equivalent to me taking something from you, and you're not justified stealing it from it if I refuse to give it to you. And second, I mean, especially when they might think it'd be related to a crime. So if a private business, if I'm a cashier at Walmart and someone comes in my lane and I see they have duct tape, a ski mask, and some handcuffs, I might call the cops and refuse to sell that to them because I think it might be related to a crime. So maybe that's what happened.
I think that's speculative, but I'll kind of go back and address the rest of your argument before I get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, either way, I don't care why. I don't think they need a reason not to sell people things. It's a private business.
Well, that's a. Are you okay? What are you implying by that? At what point do you disagree with that statement? Like,
I don't disagree with that statement ever. Private businesses have the right to sell whatever they want to whoever they want.
So do you agree that segregation should be a right of the business?
You of a business? So a business,
if a business had a sign up that said no colors allowed, you think that would be you think that's justified?
I think that's their legal right because it's their property. I certainly don't agree with it. I think they're terrible people if they do that, but people have the right to hold terrible beliefs. That's the first thing.
But the problem is that there's a difference between holding a terrible belief, right? Mm-hmm. And having your belief be a direct result in the unfair treatment of another race. The reason why we abolish segregation, despite it, being an exercise in free speech on a technical level, because it restricts the ability of others to be free, right? That's kind of
I don't believe that happens with private businesses. I don't think a private business refusing to serve someone takes away freedom, right? If I have a business and I choose not to give something to someone, I'm not harming them. I'm just not helping them. Yeah, I treat them different, but if it's you are allowed to treat people differently if it's your property. So let's say I'm like, I don't want any black people in my house. I'm allowed to do that. It's my house. I don't want to date black people. I'm allowed to do that. I'm not saying I don't want to. I'm speaking hypothetically. I don't care about skin color.
I think,
but like, let's say I say I don't want to, or it's like I don't want to buy a red car, and it's like, well, that's kind of a stupid reason. It's like, well, I don't care. It's my money. I can do whatever I want with it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I completely disagree with that. one instance rather is of direct harm, whereas one instance is of like basically what I'm saying is that regardless whether you view private businesses as having the right to deny service to someone, right? Like as you stated yourself, it is not that you aren't helping them, it is that it isn't that you are hurting them, it is that you're not helping them. The problem is that if you're not helping them, right, that is indirectly hurting them. Let's say if a
I
family
disagree entirely.
I don't see how, because if a family requires supplies, right? Let's say hypothetically, like where do you draw the line with this? Let's say
I can easily explain why. Hurt
Well, the thing-
means to cause. If you hurt someone, you are like causing them like a negative aspect, right? Letting someone even die does not cause them to die. It simply lets them die. Indirect harm is not a thing in terms of that sense.
Yeah. Okay, so let me go back for a second. Are you arguing this from a moral perspective or a legal one?
Legal. Like I think that racists are extremely
then that's objectively just wrong,
Oh, okay.
because
No, let me clarify.
we have laws in place.
Let me
to,
clarify what I mean. Let me clarify what I mean. What should be the law? I think the laws currently are immoral. So I have two levels that I operate on when I'm talking morally.
Okay.
I have my personal morals, and then I have my libertarian philosophy about liberty. I don't want people to be forced to do things they don't want to do. So I'm talking on that level right now.
Okay. And I am also a libertarian, though probably not as extreme as you are, judging by this position. Like that's
Then
not
you're
an
not a
insult.
libertarian, but yeah.
That's no. I think liberty is very important, but I also think that in instances in which that freedom results in the direct restriction of another, that is also an infringement on liberty, right? Even if at some point we must be intolerant of the intolerant in order for tolerance to perpetuate. I completely agree with that philosophy. Now that doesn't mean I think we should censor ideas or opinions. I don't believe in that, but I do think that when it pertains to business, let's just say, okay, so where do you draw the line though? Let's say
I draw the line immediately.
Okay, let's just say, for example, every business in the United States, every private business, let me say that.
Yep.
Every private business in the United States, including supermarkets.
That's fine.
What if they all decided one day to not serve black?
I know the analogy. Yeah, every private business decides not to sell to black people. Fine, it's their business. Oh well. No one's being harmed.
That raises a moral problem, because at that point, African Americans and other marginalized groups no longer have a place in which to gather supplies, other than, I guess, from directly from the government, right? That raises which inherently, that it's kind of self-defeating to your own philosophy, because that inherently restricts the liberty of others by kind of enacting it enacts an almost pseudo-authoritarian state in which the corporation can oppress whoever they desire, because it is their civil right. Right.
Okay. Liberty has nothing to do with how many options or advantages you have, right? You being rich and having more options doesn't mean you have more or less liberty. All liberty means is that you get to make the choice. So, like, just black people starving because they can't get supplies has nothing to do with liberty. They'll die with liberty. No liberty is being violated.
I think that's a really ill-informed and almost.
That's the definition of liberty. Okay, how about this?
The problem is that liberty can. The problem is that I get what you're trying to say. But the thing is that liberty, right, if afforded to something that is too powerful, in all examples, can inherently result in tyranny and authoritarianism.
It's not tyranny.
Like for example, right, you probably heard the classic statement, "There's too much money in politics." The reason why people say that, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that statement, but the reason why people say that is because corporations can essentially use their power to, buy out votes and essentially, perpetuate their support for a candidate and outrule, the desires of the majority, because they have their corporation and they have power. I think this is problematic, even if I'm not even, and just to specify, I'm not a socialist either. So I definitely am not going to take an extremist position on this. But I also acknowledge that once you get too much liberty is going to inherently derail into authoritarianism.
That analogy you gave me has nothing to do with liberty. That has to do with the faults of democracy. Right now we have a system that allows people, if we get enough people to vote away the rights of someone, it just happens, right? It's okay. That's a problem with democracy. Under a libertarian society, no amount of liberty would ever result in other people's liberty being violated. I mean, depending on how you define liberty, Like, I don't see any situation, even in that extreme one, where every private business decides not to sell to black people, and so black people starve to death. That doesn't have any impact on their liberty. They'll die on their own. No one's causing them to die.
Yeah, that's just objectively not true.
Why? That's not a
Right.
response.
Just because the response that I have to that, and I'm just going to elaborate on why that is the case, is despite the fact that the blood's. Excuse me, I'm getting a phone call. Hold on, I'm just gonna not answer this shit. It's not important. All right. So the reason why, it is still an indirect infringement on liberty. First of all, let's just define what liberty is, just so we're on the same page, right? Liberty, the state of being free within a society from oppressive restrictions imposed by an authority on one's life, behavior, or political views. Can you agree to that? Do you think that's what liberty is?
There's a little bit of ambiguity in that, because I feel like you're going to say, well, if I starve to death, I'm being restricted. I wouldn't consider
the thing is that that's my entire point, though, is that even though they are exercising their liberty is directly resulting in the restriction of liberty of others who are of
I don't
equal
define
standing.
liberty that way, and no true libertarian does.
I think that's
Oh my god,
that's truly that's despicable in a way. Like, no offense, like I think that's like that's just not true.
Okay, let's do a thought experiment. Okay, so let's say that liberty does have to do with being alive. Okay, what do you need to be alive? You need food, you need water, you need shelter. Okay, where do those things come from? They come from labor. They come from services. Who performs services? Other people. That means that if you say that you have the right to be alive, and that entails getting water, which is provided by other people, that means that you have the right to other people's labor, which means that those people don't have the right to deny the service, which means they're enslaved.
And I would argue that a private business should not have the right to deny someone of something.
Why not?
Because of an inherent trait in which they are born with, being their race. I think that is an infringement on liberty, because while it may result in restriction of the business, right, that this restriction is necessary to in order to prevent, an oligarchy, essentially, or a bureaucratic system.
Why does an oligarchy?
In which the corporation is able to control everything and everyone using their power, right?
That's voluntary. I'm okay with voluntary monopolies. Totally fine. I'm fine with voluntary oligarchs.
What is voluntary, though? Like,
it's voluntary.
Let's say it like this, right?
Yeah.
Let's say. Actually, yeah. Let's use Standard Oil. That's like the most famous monopoly in our history, right? So Standard Oil, aside from like AT&T, so Standard Oil named themselves Standard Oil, and as to appear to be the standard of oil, so that people would, indicate them as the source in which oil comes, so on and so forth, right? Which I think that's fine. But then you also see examples of Standard Oil, saying things that are just objectively not true in their advertisements of their products, which we still even see today, right?
Okay.
They, adverts for a car, for example, may, grossly, disproportionately, or rather, falsely equivalent freaking statistics, right? Now, if Standard Oil decides to, with their monopoly, decides to put out propaganda which directly lies about their products, which gets people to buy their product, that's no longer voluntary at that point. Or rather, it is voluntary, but it is a voluntary decision that is based on falsified information and not objective truth, right?
No. If they lie about the product they're giving, that does not count as voluntary interaction. The core of voluntary interaction is that there is a contract, whether it's explicit or implicit, and it's a trade deal, right? So if you say, I'm going to give you my computer for $5 and I give you $5 and you don't give me your computer, the trade deal's been violated, right? The contract, it wasn't voluntary. So if you lie about it, then it's not even considered under a capitalist or libertarian.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, but I'm saying that your position would entail that to be the case. Because otherwise, by restricting their ability to lie, what are you doing? You're restricting their liberty.
No, something's not a liberty if it takes away the liberty of other people, the right.
Yes, exactly. Yes, you just defeated your own argument.
No,
yes, I agree.
I don't think people have the right to be alive.
You don't think that you have the right to be alive?
Why would you be entitled to that?
In a society in which workers are necessary, as you stated, right? Yeah,
I get the argument that, if your liberty me not saving you doesn't violate your liberty. Oh, I'm the one interrupting. Okay. Yeah, because it's a difference between negative rights and positive rights. People don't have the right to be alive. They have the right to not be killed. Just as I don't have the right to be given guns, but I have the right to not have my guns taken from me if I acquire them. Or same with money. I'm not entitled to be given money, but if I do, how? What do you mean
yeah.
by that?
That
No, I'm
the
not.
right
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
if you,
No, if you die on your own, that's fine. If someone kills you, that's
yeah,
not fine.
but that's not.
A
I don't.
business not giving you
I don't.
food okay, if someone is starving outside of my door and I don't give them food and they die, I did not kill them. I let them die. There is a causal difference.
Yeah, in this example, though, we are going off of the idea that all of society has agreed to this sort of racially
I don't
charged
care what
covenant.
society
Yeah,
agrees.
but that's the example, though. You say under that
I
example,
misunderstood.
yeah, yeah. So what I'm
Sorry.
yeah, so what I'm saying, let me just say what I'm saying. The example pertains to if all of society agreed to a racially charged covenant and to not serve African Americans or minorities, right?
Still,
all private businesses. The problem with the problem with your philosophy is that even if the blood isn't on your hands, if you have a covenant with all private businesses to disproportionately oppress and ignore African Americans and minority communities, then you are killing them.
no, you're
Right?
not.
You are. Yes, you are.
No, you're not. You're letting them die.
Because your lack of service is a direct result of their death in this society in this example. In the example of a person outside your doorstep, right? The thing is that even if they may potentially not be able to move from where they're at, they still could potentially and probably, or rather, it is probable that they could obtain food somewhere, right?
It doesn't.
You're not the only person in society in this example.
Okay.
Yeah.
If my friend knocks over a dominoes on the table and they're knocking over, and I choose not to put my hand in the middle of the dominoes to stop it from going all the way down, and so it continues and all the dominoes fall over, I did not cause the dominoes to fall over, even though my action technically resulted in a situation where dominoes fell over.
Yeah,
there's no causal element.
Yeah, the problem with that example, though, is that the purpose of causing dominoes to fall over is presumably to actually have them the causation finish, right? The reason why you're not impeding is because the result of that cause and effect is not a negative one.
No, my motivation doesn't matter at all. Let's say that I don't want to interrupt because I just really hate dominoes because my friend touched it and he's black and I hate black people. My motivation don't matter. I still didn't cause it.
I think your motivations do matter in this instance because if we're talking about,
you can't force people to be moral.
Huh?
You can force them not to harm people, but people can be assholes. They don't have to have good motivations.
Oh, of course, but that doesn't mean that they have the right to deny service of someone for nothing that is implicit, that is intrinsically true to their nature, right? Why not? Because it's subjectively not true.
It doesn't matter.
For example, if you deny someone service because they're an asshole to you, then they have been an asshole to you. That has objectively happened, or at least as far as we can extrapolate, that has objectively happened. Let's say you recorded it so you could prove that this thing happened, right? The problem with denying service to someone because they're an African American is that is something that they cannot intrinsically control, right? That is why it is immoral, and that is why it is a restriction of liberty. They do not have control over their ethnicity, whereas someone who is an asshole does have control over whether they decide to insult you.
Do you not think that people have the right to believe wrong things?
No, I definitely do I do definitely believe that people have the right to believe in wrong things, but once their belief encroaches on the rights of others,
it doesn't encroach on anyone's rights. It simply
it does, though. We literally just established why it does.
Okay, we're going to keep going back in circles. This is my position. Not helping someone is never harming them. So it's not an encroachment. Unless you refute that, you can't continue saying that they're harming them.
It's already that premise has already been addressed, though. That's not really. Yeah,
the way that you addressed that premise was by giving me an analogy where every single person in society stopped selling black people.
Which you agreed to.
I know. I agreed. I bit the bullet and said that's fine. That's still not harming black people.
Oh God.
because no one, even if it's
As I already stated, in order for a tolerant society to exist, we must be intolerant of the
that's not
intolerant.
true. You can
I
easily
think that is true on a societal. Let's say, for example, on a societal
and
level,
that's a
right?
separate
I don't.
argument.
I
We're
don't
not
think.
talking about
No,
intolerance. We're
but
talking about
it
liberty.
pertains to this argument though, because in this argument, we're speaking about the denial of service of private businesses to minorities. Now, what I'm comparing that to is in the example of on a government level. I think the government should not be tolerant of intolerance because it
I don't care about
because it restricts it restricts the but that's what that is though. If a business denies
liberty and
someone if a
tolerance are
business
not the same thing.
if a business decides to deny an African American service simply because they are African American, that is intolerance by definition, right? So the government by restricting that ability,
Intolerance is fine.
so the government by definition is restricting
So
intolerance by imposing a law which prevents this, right? Now, what I'm saying on a societal level, the reason why we aren't tolerant of the intolerant is that we often criticize views that we find or that we find abhorrent, right? If a racist comes to you and says "fuck black people," right? Obviously, they have the right to say that, but you will, by extension, are going to critique them for that action, right? That's on a societal level. I don't think that we should be policing statements. I don't agree with that, but I definitely think that if liberty allows one to discriminate, at a certain point, liberty becomes authority, and it is no longer liberty. And the reason why that is the case is we see that in our current society. We see that, as I already mentioned, in the example of there being too much money in politics. The reason why people believe that is because corporations have the power to influence politicians and influence elections to a far greater degree than the individual citizen does. That's because a corporation is afforded more or less the same rights that a person is, right? So, and people have an issue with that because even though technically speaking, that is an element of liberty by allowing both things to take place, the reason why it is a bad thing in this example is that a corporation has a disproportionately far greater power than an individual worker. Therefore, the worker who make up the majority of society, despite making up the majority of society, are going to be intrinsically oppressed by this corporation, right? So, in essence, you are denying them liberty, right? Even if you are advocating for liberty in which everyone is free, the simple reality of it is that if you allow everyone to be completely free and do as they want, right, you're going to have instances in which liberty become authority, and that's the problem, and that's basically my position. And I think if we're just going to keep going in circles, like you said, I don't feel the need to elaborate on it any further. If someone else,
so I mean, there are things you said that I really don't think that like our only option is to go in circles. I think that there are very clear disagreements we're having right now that we can interrogate. But I mean, like I'm enjoying debating you. This is a great conversation.
I definitely think
And
that
I thank you for having it. But I mean, something that I'll say is I'm not a fan of the type of, like, I guess, debate style where it's just like monologuing. Like, there's utility in interruption. So like what I feel like keeps happening is you make an argument and I have a direct response to it immediately. And so I go to make it, but you just keep talking and then I have to wait 40 seconds for you to finish the point.
No, I definitely don't. No, I definitely agree with you. I don't agree in overtly cutting people off unless it is for utmost necessity.
It can be efficient.
If you tell that I'm like, if you think I'm monologuing over you, then I apologize for that. But what I would also say is that I think the reason why I am is because the argument that you're about to present, or the argument that you have presented several times in which I made that same point, is usually the same one in which you argue that liberty, it must not be impeached even in the face of potential tyranny, right?
So
That's the reason why I kind of like continue talking, is because I don't really feel as though that's a valid response for the reasons that I've already mentioned.
Well, then you can just have me make the response and then respond to it when I make it instead of preemptively. But I mean, it's because maybe I have a response that's different. So in this last one, the response I wanted to make was, you're somehow equating tolerance with liberty. I don't think people being intolerant restricts anyone's liberty, so it's not relevant. Your Karl Popper paradox of intolerance doesn't have anything to do with this.
But that's kind of that's objectively incorrect, though. We see examples of corporate monopolies restricting the liberty of the individual man. That is objectively true. Right, we've seen that historically.
It's objectively true is not significant. Obviously, I disagree with you. There's no point in saying it.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter if you disagree with me. That happens in our current society, and that has happened in the past. The problem is that just looking at the examples that I have given within this argument, right? I have provided several examples as to when this is applicable and why it is true.
I addressed.
Now you may still okay.
I addressed I already told you the monopoly would not count as voluntary because they're actually being lied to, and so they're literally not. It is not voluntary by definition.
Yeah, we've already been through that line of reasoning, and then I caught you essentially, self-defeating your own premise when you stated that would encroach on their liberty. Well, the thing is that now not allowing a corporation to lie is also technically encroaching on the corporation's liberty, because they should have the right to lie. They should have the right to deceive people by your worldview.
No, I've agreed with you that people do not have the right to take away other people's rights, right? And so I can't use my liberty to take away yours. Where we're disagreeing is the notion of taking away someone's liberty is a directly causal notion. And so if there's no causal harm, you can't be taking away liberty. I don't believe there's any causation involved in every every business owner not selling to black people.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that just because someone isn't a direct involvement within a situation, or rather, let me not say direct because that's kind of not a very specific word. If a corporation is not directly going out of their way to murder African Americans, but instead are doing things which result in the death of African Americans, which is an irresponsible action, right?
No, that's fine.
The problem that I have with your position, though, is that is just that throughout history we have shown that is not fine, and the reason why that's dangerous is because
history is wrong.
If it is not, just because something isn't deliberate does not mean it isn't intended, right? If we see, for example, the Nuremberg trials, right?
Those are wrong too. Nuremberg.
I'm just using them. Even if you disagree with them, I'm just using them as an example, right? The Nuremberg trials consisted of, the Nazis were charged of several crimes, one of which were, crimes against. I believe it was crimes against humanity, crimes against peace, and I believe there was one other one, and then the fourth was that conspiracy to commit any of them, right? So the reason why they implemented that specific, clause in the punishment method is that just because someone didn't directly kill Jewish people, they still put in place the system which allowed this thing to perpetuate. And therefore, by logically speaking, they are as guilty for the deaths as the people who killed the Jewish people themselves, right? Because regardless of whether you have the blood on your hands or not, you put in place the system which allows oppression, which allows death and destruction. You are just responsible for its weight within its wake as the people who are, perpetuate that on the ground level, right?
Yeah.
So, continue.
You'd have to go into more details on the Nuremberg Code. I mean, like, taking Nazis and then testing on them against their will definitely violates autonomy. Like, you'd have to go into more details to see what's relevant.
Aren't trials by definition against the will of the person accused?
Like what?
Isn't prosecution by definition against the will of the person accused, because you have to actually forcibly get them to be trialed for, how much of a libertarian are you? Are you an anarchist?
No, I'm a minarchist, which is like minimal government involvement. The reason why you can jail people is because if you have evidence that they committed a crime, that's why you can force them to be prosecuted, because they've already violated liberty.
Yeah, I think, and again, this is just going to completely go in circles, because if we're speaking about what violates liberty, by your definition of what liberty is, you have already admitted an instance in which liberty is violated.
I did not. I told you that liberty has to be causal. How is?
Yeah, but lying. Yeah, but as I already stated, if you are deceiving someone, right, that is your right. That is your conversation.
No, that causes liberty to be violated.
For example, what if I've been lying to you about this? What if I've been lying to you this whole time about being African American? What if I'm not actually black? Well, that is my.
You don't have a contract.
That is my individual right to lie to you, right?
Yeah, because it's not a contract.
But the problem is that in the instances on a societal level where false advertising is used, then you disagree with it, and I think that points out a complete,
because it's a contract.
What contract? What are you talking? A contract restricts liberty. A contract restricts liberty. A contract restricts liberty.
I already told you that it's okay to restrict liberty when that liberty restricts another liberty. Where we disagree is that I don't think you've demonstrated that me letting black people die and everyone else in the planet letting black people die restricts their liberty. Because I've said liberty violation requires causation. And I've made the argument that you have not responded to that letting someone die is not causing them to die. Until you respond to that, you can't say that liberty is
first of all, for one, where's your definition? Where's your personal definition of liberty coming from? Because I've just kind of been arguing, assuming that your position is actually one that is justifiable. But under this example, right? There's nothing actually indicating that your definition of liberty would be applicable in this
This
instance.
is how libertarians define liberty. I don't define liberty. I don't define liberty in the sense of like, ooh, if you have more options, you have more liberty. I don't think anyone in political theory has ever used liberty that way. I mean, maybe some people have, but like,
yeah, maybe not anyone who is a monarchist or anarchist would define liberty in that way because
I don't think any libertarian would ever affirm the idea of liberty as the amount of options you have. If my girlfriend breaks up with me, has my liberty been reduced?
No.
But my options
the problem is that sex. The problem is that sex is not. First of all, sex isn't necessary to live. Like
it doesn't matter if it's necessary to live.
Sex is not less necessary to live, right?
Why
it may be
matter?
a great thing. Yeah. And also, for example, are we saying that your girlfriend broke up for you for say the reason that we're saying that your girlfriend broke up for you that because you're, let's say in this example, black, right? She just doesn't like black people for some reason now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is there is a difference between encroaching on the rights of someone in which encroaching on those rights does not result in the restriction of anything that is intrinsically necessary for them to live, which itself is a restriction on liberty, and a difference between something. Yeah, that is a yeah. Well, it wouldn't be. The reason why I would
be obligated to keep other people alive.
You're not obligated to keep other people alive. But what you are obligated to do if it's as a private business owner, right? Because in the example of the poor black person coming to your house, again, it's still probable for them to receive food from somewhere else. But as the example, if you're a private business owner and the rest of your, private business owners within society all agree that, we should not serve things to black people, right? They are intrinsically basing that assertion on a lie. Just as Standard Oil's propaganda is based on a lie.
People are allowed to lie when it's not harming.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, but the problem is that but you just said people weren't allowed to lie in the example
because
of Standard
Oil. Contract. I've already said this.
But why, a contract encroaches on liberty.
Yes, lying doesn't encroach on liberty. Lying in a contract encroaches on liberty.
Yeah, but why? Okay, why does a contract need to exist? We're talking about liberty. Why on earth would a contract or an agreement between two people?
Because at the core of liberty is voluntary trade.
Yeah. Okay.
And if someone lies,
you can still voluntarily trade with someone based on a lie. It may not be truly voluntary. No, because it may not be truly voluntary, but by your definition of what liberty is, this poses a massive issue with your idea.
No, I've already told you that if your liberty violates someone else's liberty, it doesn't count. So you don't have the liberty to lie in a contract.
It doesn't count. But you're poking holes in your own argument. You're trying to make exceptions where there are not. And for that reason, I don't see the benefit. I don't see any benefit in continuing this discussion. Dude, because you're not really.
You must be intentionally misunderstanding my. I've clarified this like 5 times now. If it's a contract, it's involuntary. If it's not, you can lie. That's fine.
Yeah. Why are contract? Yeah, but my point is, why are contracts necessary within a libertarian society? Why do they hold weight? Right? Why would they hold any intrinsic weight if the idea is to allow the individual to exercise their liberty to the fullest extent? Then why on earth would we allow contracts? As that is a direct encroachment on liberty by your definition. Now, if you're going to say that inherently jeopardizes people in the sense that a lie that is non-contractual, right, or that is contractually broken, encroaches on the rights of others, then again, I would also say that. Then, by extension, the denial of a black man the right to live, which is inherently the same as denying them the right to not be killed. The right to not be killed is exactly the same as the right to live.
Definition of liberty. I've already told you, you don't have the right to be alive. You have the right to not be harmed.
The right to not be harmed is the right to be alive.
That's not true.
And within the context of this discussion, it is true. If your death is a direct result.
It's not a direct result of anyone's action.
The problem is that if you institute a system which allows or which perpetuates this death as a significant part of society, it is directly their fucking cause,
no,
nigga. It is directly their fucking cause. What do you mean prove it? Nigga, I already gave multiple
I can disprove it.
I gave several examples of how this is applicable.
I can disprove it. With the following premises that I've had this entire time. Premise 1 is that in order for something to be a violation of liberty, it has to be a direct harm. Premise
Okay.
2, letting someone die is simply the lack of help. It's not harming them. Just as letting dominoes fall doesn't cause the dominoes, it just lets it. Now, this doesn't matter how big the scale is. It doesn't matter if I do it, if 5 people do it, if a million do it. If 5 billion people choose not to serve black people, if 5 billion people choose not to serve black people, all of them are just not
I would
helping.
say the domino example is more correlative to the example you gave of the girlfriend denying you sex or denying you the ability to be with her. Right. In that example, that is something that does not necessitate life. Therefore, it is not an encroachment on rights. Right. If a thing is necessary to live, right,
Why?
like such as food,
Why?
it is then an encroachment on, because it is inherently an encroachment on the right to live.
Why am I obligated to keep you alive?
If private businesses deny service to an African American,
right? To keep you alive.
Yeah.
Why is anyone obligated to keep you alive?
Yeah. Why is anyone obligated to keep? Because as you said, you have the right to not be harmed. Indirectly resulting, indirectly.
I've said this like 10 times.
It's not indirect. It's not indirect, right? Direct. If you put in place the systems which allow and perpetuate the disproportionate deaths of African Americans,
allow.
Yeah, disproportionately affect the deaths of African Americans by your own legislation, then the death is on your hands. Period. And the reason why it is on your hands, and the reason why your logic is inconsistent, is that you've already established that there are several holes in your position. I see them all as very, very, I see them as very.
All of the analogies you've given, all of them, I've made distinctions. The reason why lying in a contract is wrong is because that directly harms people. It's not because you're not.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. How?
Because if we sign a contract saying that I'll give you $5 if you give me your computer, I give you $5, and then you don't give me your computer, you've harmed me, you've stolen from me.
No, you didn't directly take $5 from someone. Therefore, it is an indirect by your definition. It is indirect. Exactly. Yeah, you have. By my position, you have directly harmed someone. But by my position, denying someone the right to live, or the right to not be harmed, which are correlative in this example. They're the same. They're synonyms in this example. It means the same thing in this context.
I know
you are killing them.
If someone were to write this out and keep track of all of the arguments, I guarantee they would catch you in circular reasoning. You're what happens is we go to this is what we do. We go to one analogy, you give me an analogy, I answer it, and then we move on to the question about letting people die. And you know what you do? You respond to that by appealing to the analogy that I already responded to.
You've given several analogies that I have then established why they are not applicable. The analogy of the girlfriend, the analogy of the dominoes. These analogies don't work because they are not applicable to this example. Now,
let me give you a different analogy.
Now, before you continue, though, someone else wants to actually tag in. Who wanted to? Was that Caesar?
Yeah, Caesar. What did you have to say?
Oh, well, whoever it was. I mean, you can still say what you're going to say, Michael, but I'm going to let them continue.
I just want to hear yes or no from you. I just want to hear yes or no from this question.
Yeah, sure.
Let's say that I have this very rare disease. Very rare. So I'm a black man. I have this very rare disease where if I don't have physical sex with a woman, I die. Okay? I go up to a woman, I ask her, she says no. I go up to every woman I ask, they say no. They let me die. All it would take is 30 seconds of inconvenience on their part versus my entire life gone. Are they allowed to do that?
Yeah, that's an awful example.
Why
if you want me to answer yes or no, the thing is,
yeah, answer it.
Answer
it. Go ahead, answer it.
Wait.
Answer.
Oh, yeah. The problem with that example is that
I need to lie.
The problem with that example is that sex inherently implies. Well, there are several problems with it, but the one that I would appeal to right now is that sex inherently implies that there will be some, percentage risk of impregnation, which can bring.
I'm infertile. I'm also infertile.
Yeah,
I'm infertile. The analogy is I'm infertile. I can't get girls pregnant.
Then you just move the goalpost, and that's not the same example.
I'm creating an analogy to test your position. That's not that's a reductio ad absurdum, not shifting the goalpost. I'm infertile. I need to have sex or I die.
Yeah, you're encroaching on the rights of their body, though.
Okay,
their internal body.
Ooh, boom. Okay, you're encroaching on the rights of the businesses when you force them to say
your business is not your body. At least by my position. Yeah, by my position. Huh?
We're talking about liberty. You can't
Wait,
claim to be a libertarian if you don't care about private
Attorney,
property.
wait, Attorney trying to say something. What were you trying to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say, Caesar, do you want to take over from here? Because I feel like this is probably not gonna go too well. Maybe you can help.
Sure.
Well, thank you for discussing. I know I got frustrated. It wasn't because of,
Oh, yeah, we both,
because
yeah,
of the monologuing, but I enjoyed the debate, though. It was
we both did. It's fair, yeah.
well, thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. I'm still gonna be listening though. So, Caesar, you can go.